Welcome to the GreatBase Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with
Ivan Ozerets.
And we're advancing. We're not even going to call in. We have our fact checker, our podcast coach on the line from Miami, Andreas Barbosa. Good morning, Andres.
Good morning, Steve. Good morning, Ivan.
Good morning.
Nice to be back.
This might be the first time that we've been on the air in the morning. If we've been on in the air in the morning, it's been 1 a.m. It hasn't been 9 a.m. But are you in Miami or are you in Bogota? Where are you?
I'm in Miami.
I'm
in Miami at least for a few more days, and I head off to see my parents for Thanksgiving week. So I will be gone soon enough. But this is the first time in a while that I've done a podcast with you guys and been local. I kind of missed the days of Boynton Beach when I used to drive up there and do it up there.
South Florida. Yeah, we're up here in the mountains in Virginia. You have a request. You want to start with short socks. What do you got on short socks? If anybody's listened to our last podcast.
Yeah, so I heard Andy and Dave go off on socks, and I'm Team Dave. I'm also a short sock guy. But it reminded me of a funny story when I was in college. So this was 1994, 30 years ago. Freshman at FIU, and basically we go in for our physicals, and they tell us, and I think it was you that mentioned people wearing double socks. I used to be a double sock guy. And I go in for the physical, and they measure me, and I come out at 6 feet. And I've never been 5'11" my entire life, never been 6 feet. But because they didn't make me take my socks off, it came out on the media guide, 6 feet. I loved it. So once I got 6 feet, freshman year, I said, I'm going to do this again next year. I did it again the following year, add an extra couple socks, tried to get to 6'1", no such luck. I tried the next year again. I must have come in with like 7 pairs of socks on to try to get to 6'1". And the lady that was conducting the physical looked at me and says, "Are you okay? Are you cold?" And I'm like, "No, why?" She goes, "Why do you have so many pairs of socks on? Take them off." Had to take them off. So my junior year media guide comes out at like, I might have come in at 5'10" actually, because that was really really painful. So I got a good laugh at it when we were talking about socks, because it reminded me of being in college. I still have those media guides somewhere. My parents probably have them somewhere. Should use them for some of your Instagram content.
Socks. Well, maybe we can talk about Jack Sock, but what did you think of the ATP final? Did you watch that with Center and Fritz, or were you busy?
I did not watch it. I've actually become part of the, Sinner doesn't do much for me as far as TV viewing, so neither does Fritz. It really needs a certain matchup for me to be entertained. I did watch a lot of the doubles, actually, from Turin. There are very few singles matches that I actually sat there and watched throughout.
Taylor Fritz has improved so much. He starts the point so well with his serve and his return of serve, staying close to the baseline, just pounding ground strokes. But really from the service line in, he's still stuck in the mud. He played world team tennis when he's 17, 18 years old. We're going to guess 18. And Raven Klaassen was on the team. And his father and or mother, I'm not sure which one, but they approached Raven to coach Taylor. And I remember Raven telling me that. I said, you didn't have to be a full-time coach, because at that time he was not ready to do such as that, to be a full-time coach. But no, Bill Tilden, spin of the ball, match playing spin of the ball. What beats baseline is net. And it's, even if it's marginal, if you're playing somebody who's a little bit better than you baseline to baseline, you get that short ball, principal base, you got to go in. But tell us a little about the doubles.
Yeah, I was really watching, I love watching Pelagius and Granollers. I like watching those two guys, but I was really watching like Jordan Townsend. I actually like watching singles guys that try to like play singles and doubles every week. So I think Thompson had a career year this year. I think in singles, he might be close to top 25. And he had a chance to be number one in the world in doubles. I think if he won that semi and won the final, he had a chance for number one. So, but yeah, it is what it is. I mean, there's a few other matchups I saw. I didn't see Rajiv Ram there this year. Obviously, I didn't see Austin this year. So, but I probably should have watched a little bit of Sinner. Michael Russell, that coaches Taylor, he was at UM when I was at FIU, so we got to know those guys. Him and Ivan Rodrigo were like the stud recruits back in the day when they came in as freshmen. Done a great job actually with Taylor.
Michael Russell's all muscle, small guy, but fitness freak.
Yeah, guy. I saw him a couple of years ago in I don't know where I saw him in Coral Gate in Coconut Grove. I mean, I was still fit as a fiddle, so it's good to see him.
Yeah, he went 5 sets with Guga, right, at the French?
Had match point. That was that famous match where Guga laid on the clay and drew the heart.
With the Aussies, getting back to the doubles, so I still think it exists all these years later, the Aussie influence. Roger Federer's always wanted to say that, certainly part of his background is Australian tennis. Peter Carter, then Tony Roach. But back in the day, certainly the grass courts had something to do with it. And then, tennis was played in the schools in Australia, so they'd get 4 on a court versus 2. Let's get rolling with our topic today, a podcast. We're talking about tennis podcasts. Andres, why don't you lead us off? What's your first thing?
First thing that comes to mind for me, anyway, is how little I actually watch the Tennis Channel. I think to me, the Tennis Channel kind of began really trying to promote content that wasn't tennis. So every time you would tune into the Tennis Channel, you'd have Center Court, you'd have this analysis in the studio, and and there would be matches on. So I'm like, I'm not interested in listening to you guys just talk random topics. I tuned in to watch tennis. So as time has gone on, and Roddick was probably the first one to go out there in the podcast world, at least for tennis, at least the ones that I was listening to. And he was completely different on his podcast versus how he is on Tennis Channel. I mean, he's not bad on the Tennis Channel, but he's hilarious on his podcast. It's uncensored, unlike the GreatBase podcast, which I know Steve is pulling hard to have the reins loosened on him. But that was really the first one that kind of dove me into watching or listening to podcasts.
Let me interrupt. Go back. Which player that you're talking about?
Sorry, Andy Roddick? Or?
No, you're talking about Roddick right now. Okay, fine. Okay, Roddick. No, I didn't pick up on that senior moment.
Yeah. The Roddick podcast was really the first one that I started watching. And I liked it. I thought he was very uncensored. I mean, he basically wasn't holding back on his words like he might on the Tennis Channel. And, I thought it was pretty good content. And then other people started coming out with similar or better versions of what he was doing. And, but it's interesting. It's created interest in the sport in a way that I haven't seen it in a long time. I mean, basically you can almost say since Bud Collins, has there been like this many Pied Pipers that are actually promoting tennis, let's say Monday to Friday, instead of on the weekends, when you have finals or semis.
To digress, the Tennis Channel is for sale right now, $750 million.
And I saw the Miami Open is also for sale.
But Mike McLaughlin, who I spent so many years with, we were on the staff at Vic Braden Tennis College, Costa de Casa, California. And then all the years, he's very, very close to Vic, and now still was constant communication with Melody, Vic's widow. But he's the one who told me that's how we could really change tennis, if we could buy the Tennis Channel. So I want to ask you right now on the air, you have $750 million?
I'm not donating $1 billion for, I saw like, some element of, I forgot what it was. It might have been CNN or one of those, media outlets were also for sale. So, I mean, personally, I think it's a dying, you know, it's a dying world in a sense. I think there's more and more people that have cut the cord that don't go off and tune into TV. My dad still does. Whenever he comes into town, I've got to make sure I've got TV up and running because he likes to watch his ESPN and watch different little things. But for the most part, and even as a coach, I've realized that the kids are less likely to watch tennis matches from start to finish like I might have as a kid. So I really go out of my way to try to, let's say, find condensed versions or shortened little versions to try to stress a point to try to get some interaction because if you're expecting them to watch a tennis match, the odds are not high unless Alcaraz is playing that they're actually going to watch the match.
No, 100%. For our listeners, we have a place with 8 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and see, Ivan has up on the board. We have quite a few people coming to visit over the holidays, and I would say for the most part, no one watches TV. They disappear. They go to their rooms, but their laptop or their telephone, that's their TV, and they certainly can do whatever they want. So they're not looking to say, okay, I'm going to watch their Tuesday night sitcom. I remember watching the Shark Tank for the first time with one of my sons, and I thought, gee, that's this great show. And I thought, gee, I'll just watch it every Wednesday night when it's on or whatever night it was. And then my son said, well, all you have to do is go to the internet and you can watch 24 hours of Shark Tank if you want. So what's the term that when people make the trip to Australia or back, they binge? They'll watch like a series, Yellowstone or Breaking Bad. They'll just watch it. They're not watching it in 30 or 60-minute segments.
I remember when you went through your Breaking Bad phase. You were so happy getting near the end.
Oh, COVID. Andy Fitzell, I remember he said, yeah, we got to watch this. He'd already seen it. And I said, how long is it? 42 hours. I go, no way, Fitzell. But then, 2 episodes in, you're like hooked. I got to watch this.
But going back to the tennis channel or tennis viewing, it's not a unique problem that's only for tennis, right? I would say more and more people don't sit and watch an NFL game from start to finish. Most people probably don't watch regular season baseball or basketball from start to finish. So in football, everybody has a fantasy team. They worry about their fantasy team probably more so than they worry about the actual team. There are guys that are maybe gamble on the sport that they may watch it, but I would say there's less and less people that watch it either in person or on TV for the actual sport. I always wonder, like, the people that are going out there to the event and watching live, are they really there for the tennis or are they there more for the scene, basically? So, yeah, I just think that tennis or sports in general are being a little bit more aware of this, and you have to go out there and promote other forms of media to get interest in the sport, or else the sport will die.
With choices, I'm a hockey fan, and it used to be, well, okay, Saturday night, this is the game they're showing. That was the only choice you had. And then now you can push some buttons and you can watch any game you want. Way back when there's only 3 TV stations, Notre Dame football was on every Saturday across the country. But now, even like watching the NCAAs just started yesterday in Waco, Texas. Push a few buttons and you can watch which match you want to. So I think you really have to be a diehard tennis fan. One thing with the tennis channel, I find myself very often in a room where the tennis channel is on, but not the volume. So you can, if they are showing matches, you can be watching tennis, and then you can listen to the podcast of your choice.
Well, I'll take it a step further. I mean, there are apps like Tennis TV that have no commentators announcing certain matches, and you actually can hear the interaction between the player's box and the player speaking to the chair umpire, from their bench. It's a completely different perspective, and I think it's great. I love listening to those more than I want to hear somebody give an opinion on, why they missed a volley or why they missed an overhead or what have you. It's being able to hear the interaction between player and coach, I think is great, or player and chair umpire about a potential problem that's brewing. I think it's way more interesting than just typically what a commentator offers. So it's basically going to become survival of the fittest, hopefully, where only the best commentators survive, right? Like I love listening to certain commentators that say, I like listening to Courier, I like listening to Arias, I like listening to Shander Rubin, but there are others that I completely tune off. Let's say a Ted Robinson or Brett Haber, I'm muting all the way.
Well, I think sometimes their role too is Robinson or Haber. They're just a supporter. I mean, their role is what they provide the color, the transitions. They're for the most.
That's what it should be. That's what it should be. But they've kind of, as the years have gone on.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've been obviously listening and watching tennis for ages now, 30 plus years. I remember when Robinson was on USA Network announcing US Open matches with Vitas Gerulaitis and or John McEnroe, and he would be sort of the point guard. He would announce the score, announce this and that, and then he would feed it to the other guy for the analysis. But now it has become where they're voluntarily providing their own opinions on, on the ins and out of a mistake or a strategy or what have you. And they don't have that experience, right? Like when you go off and question an Alcaraz for serving and volleying on a certain point, and he happens to lose that point, and you're wondering, oh, he should have stayed back. Based on what, So I think their role is expanded, maybe because they're paired up sometimes with an analyst who's not saying much, and maybe they feel the need to speak more. But all in all, I just think it's very rare that you sit and watch a tennis match and you're like blown away, by the coverage. I want tennis to be a little bit like the NFL, where you see Tony Romo almost diagnose a play and tell you this is going to happen, and it happens. Courier does that a lot of times, but other times, Davenport sometimes does a very good job of like letting you know what, especially female players, what they're feeling in a certain match, and usually she's right on target. So is Shander Rubin. So, I mean, am I a little bit of a snob when it comes to my tennis commentators? Sure, but they have and I think this applies to everything. They've got a very limited shelf life to sort of grab your attention. It goes back to that interview that we did with the author. I forgot of the Gen Z. We've got a very limited amount of attention or time to grab someone's attention. If you don't do it, you lost them.
Yeah, Steve Robertson wrote the book Generation Z. Listeners can go back and listen to that. I talked to him not too long ago. He doesn't have enough data to write his next book on the Alpha generation. That's an update. I've watched tennis in many other countries. And of course, obviously, there's a language barrier for me in most countries, only speaking English. I can remember being at the Orange Bowl and a Polish player, outstanding player. He wasn't really allowed to travel. He was one of the best players in the world. Vitek Miras. This is in juniors, but he didn't really get the chance to leave Poland. But I believe it was 6, that he could speak 6 languages. We'd go from coach to coach. I goes, I want to know what they're saying. I want to know what they're saying. And really, it came right down to it. They're saying the same things. Very general, tennis myth after tennis myth. And that's very true from one country to the next, listening to the commentators. One thing, Bill Jacobson, the founder of CompuTennis, we dedicated one or two podcasts to Bill. He certainly, with his work with statistics, I think that's improved tennis on TV, but I don't think they do that enough. What are your thoughts on that? In other words, share comments on the stats.
Well, I mean, it also kind of determines, what's the saying? Like there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, so I think a lot of that really depends on who's charting or who is, there was a time there where they're basically were counting aces under the winner category. And I kind of thought that was a little bit ridiculous because you already were charting for aces. It's like you were double counting it. And, what is an unforced error? I mean, for different players, it's a different shot, right? So I remember the late Francisco Montana Sr., he used to always have a saying and tell me, if you can get a racket on the ball, you should make it. And it's not always the case when you watch some of these matches, right? Like, it really depends. An unforced error is a little bit subjective. And so basically, I don't know who does all the stats for these matches, but, it doesn't seem like my numbers would coincide always with their numbers. So, but yeah, I mean, anything that's instructional, informational, or educational should be promoted, in my opinion. Now, you don't need to drown them in data, but, every other sport does it. The NFL does it where, a pass is completed and our next gen stats tells us that had a 4% chance of being completed. I mean, great. I guess something different, but they give it to you, and whether or not you go with it is up to you. But basically, I think that you look at someone like Courier, he does a great job of like using Hawkeye and using it to analyze things. Over the past year, they've talked about how Zverev's toss has come down, and they numbers from 2023 and 2022 to talk about it. I mean, that's great. That is interesting. That's or when you see a repeat of a matchup from the previous year, and this year the player who lost the year before is winning, they show the difference in strategy. That's interesting. So it can be done, and it can be made tennis interesting. But I think there's very few that can actually get that message across in an entertaining and informative way.
With Courier, obviously he's been doing it for so long. I think with anything, there's been improvement. Just think about it when a player starts, they go from being an athlete to being a broadcaster. It's a big transition. I think at one point, with Chris Evert asking Novak, you're winning these early round matches so convincingly. Do you ever think about going forward? I know Raven Klaassen said this. We asked him when he retired, because he's done in South Africa, done TV work. Would you be interested in being a commentator? And he said no. He thinks that the commentators are not critical. They're not really. It's like what you just said about forced errors, unforced errors. Bob Hewitt, he's Australian, but he played for South Africa for years. He was number one in doubles. So Hewitt, it's the same thing. If you get your racket on the ball, you got to make that shot. Going back to Bill Jacobson, it's really interesting. A lot of times they just do winner to error ratio. They don't talk about forcing. Are they applying pressure? Was it a forced error? But it's a really good point, whether it's a forced or unforced error. Now, when Braden was on TV, I was talking to Andy Fitzell about this just yesterday, that he was asked to entertain, and he could do both. He certainly could be informational, but humor. He's just so funny. There's a lot to be said for these podcasts, because a TV commentator, how much time do they really have? Where they do have time is when they're in the, I'm not sure what you called it. What's the name of the tennis channel where it's just the players, just the commentators at the desk. Center court. So post match, they have quite a bit of time, but that's a different challenge. I would think in some ways an easier challenge than trying to talk and say something in between points. I like it when they say very little. They just let you watch the match.
I never really experienced listening to Vic on telecast when I was a kid or even in college. But, in the last few years, I randomly on YouTube, like I'll see a match, let's say from the Jimmy Connors senior tour, and Vic would be announcing. And I actually thought it was pretty interesting. I mean, maybe he was, maybe you're talking about before that when he was on, was it PBS? But that he was told to be funny. But I thought even when he was doing the Connors tour, it was informative and funny. So basically, again, you can't expect everybody to be this perfect vision, right? Like John McEnroe was never as informative as somebody else, but he was kind of funny. Like you always remember certain situations that made you laugh or stories that we bring up. So, when you mentioned like someone like Chris Everett, I remember when she started as a commentator on NBC in 1990, I believe. She was starting out, but I would say like 30 years later, she really improved or evolved. Whereas when you see some other ones like the Davenport or Shanda Rubin, from day one, they've gotten a lot better. And, some like Alexander Stevenson, who never improved, they kind of, let's say, pushed her off to a secondary court. But, that's why these podcasts are great, because people that understand what they're there for, and they're, at least in my case, constantly bringing me back in. If they do a lesson, if they do an episode once a week, the content is always there to sort of bring you back the next week. I will kind of say in Roddick's case, that has kind of gone down a little bit. I mean, compared to some of the other ones, be whatever you want to listen to. Do you want humor? Do you want education? Like this one, this podcast, whatever it is, you constantly have to keep, bringing the viewer in. So it'd be kind of interesting for me to think back at what point I stopped listening to the Roddick one versus the other ones. Maybe it's because it comes on a lot more during the week. Maybe they're on more times than when I care to listen to.
With Braden going back, he was on PBS. They didn't have commercials, so he was doing his 1 minute tip. He did 90 seconds in between changeovers. Donald Dell and Bud Collins were doing the commentating. Remember the hockey, you're a player, an author, commentator, manager. Ken Dryden played hockey at Cornell initially, but he was one of those all-everything goaltenders. And he makes a comment that your peak, when you're most enthusiastic about your sport, you love everything. So for me, I was just a newcomer to tennis back in the 70s. And I loved Bud Collins and Donald Dell. Of course, so different, but Bud Collins was really historical, humorous as well. They were a great team, but perhaps that was because I was just so new and so enthusiastic, so energetic about learning as much about tennis as possible. But personality difficulty comes into it. Bjorn Borg and Stan Smith, two great champions. There was a time where Borg was in the NBC booth. He fell asleep during one of those long French Open matches. He probably had too many beers the night before, but you think of personality, those two are more introverted, but I think of Gilbert and Jimmy Arias, that extroversion comes out. Oh, there's so many things with, like say, comparing a podcast to a telecast. Is it a 2-man crew? Is it a 3-man crew? Sometimes they have a person who's courtside. Vic Braden, I can remember when, certainly going way back when he was a coach of Tracy Austin, but then he was actually in the booth with Tracy Austin. And was it going to be, and the agents get involved too? Is it going to be a two-person crew, three-person crew? Just like with podcasts, is it going to be two people chatting, three, four? But I've been told, I think this number's probably gone up by 1 million since I was first told this or read it, that there was 2.5 million podcasts. You can choose your topic. And like to my knowledge, the Bryan brothers, they don't have a podcast, but I mean, I would just think that podcast would really climb up the ranks. I've got a list of podcasts that I wrote down. I think I've got maybe 15 tennis podcasts with.
Wow, a lot.
Holding Court with Patrick McEnroe. I just wrote down a couple of thoughts from his. He has some guests that are not just tennis guests. And I heard this gentleman, his background, he's very much in politics. It was great how he defined the portal in college tennis. He said everybody's a free agent. Anytime they want to be a free agent, they just go to the portal. The coach screams at them. They just push a few buttons and they let everybody know they want to be traded. They want to play for a different coach. I go down the list here. Renee Stubbs. She has a podcast. I'm not sure what the name of her podcast is. I think of Renee Stubbs. Andy Fitzell was coaching the Aussie. Kimberly Burrell. And so when you be at the major tournaments, like say, maybe it's the Australian Open, main draw, Wimbledon qualies, whatever, he said all the Aussies would approach Kimberly. And Andy said he remembered a story I told him about Renee Stubbs. It was in Tampa. It was an exhibition. All four players are wearing a headset. And she's just nonstop. They're playing mixed doubles. Sampras is on the other side. And Sampras says, and everybody in the stadium could hear it. It's just entertainment. He goes, well, my wife could be mad at me for this, but Renee, will you shut up? But no, gift of gab, Mike Costa has a podcast, played tennis at Illinois under Craig Tiley, spent time with us. I remember, certainly, it's important, I guess, in some ways to be recognized. I can remember giving him a hard time, and he wrote a book, 101 Tennis Tips by Mike Costa. And he has another book coming out, and it's a tennis book. He has a podcast. For the most part, he doesn't have guests. And I've only gone maybe a half dozen times to his podcast. But I remember watching a college hockey game on TV, and Costa goes by, and he's riding the Zamboni, the machine for our listeners, that fresh ice for the second period. Machine goes around and around the rink, and he's on it with a microphone. He's entertaining the audience. So he certainly paid his dues. I remember Costa telling me that being a comedian is just like being a tennis player. You only make money if you're on TV. But he's from Michigan. Vic Braden's from Michigan. I remember telling Costa, because I just knew that he had big-time communication skills and a big-time sense of humor. And I remember telling Costa, you should learn tennis information, really learn the tennis math, learn the nuts and bolts, the X's and O's. I remember telling Vicky Duval the same thing. Somebody I spent time with, and because she also big smile and big personality, and she was given a chance. Maybe her voice wasn't quite right. She has that squeaky voice, but I still think that there's a place for someone who really study the game and help educate their audiences through TV. And I think that, as you said, it's easier to do that through podcasts. Use another one, control the controllables. Daniel Kiernan, I know by listening, he doesn't remember, but he spent a month, 4 weeks, English player. It was a group of players. It was sponsored by Range Rover, the English cars. And Angela Buxton, a former Wimbledon doubles champion, was their chaperone. He has an interesting concept on his podcast where at the end, he finishes with a speaker and says, pass the baton, tell me who you can put me in contact with to be our next guest. So he has some really famous people on his podcast. And I've heard them say that thank you very much to the listeners, but with some poll, they've been ranked number one for like 3 years in a row. I told Dave Anderson, who's been on our podcast many times, that Daniel Kiernan doesn't remember working with us because he's talked about his experience, but because shortly after it was called Seguso Bassett's Academy became Chris Everett's. I'll keep going. You can tell me your favorite podcast.
Well, I can say without a doubt that I don't listen to any of those three. So,
Holding Court, Renee Stubbs, Mike Costa, Daniel Kiernan. That's four.
Four. Sorry, but Costa, I do feel like I'd laugh on that one. I might want to watch that one.
Yeah.
I actually just now thinking about it. I think the first one that even before Roddick, I feel like the first podcast that I listened to was Jimmy Connors.
Oh, that's right.
One with his son.
Advantage
he does
Connors.
one with his son. So yeah, I like listening to that. It was, I was a big Connors fan as a kid, so I like listening to that one. But it's also it's just become a routine. So basically, I know that GreatBase podcast comes out Wednesday. I know that Nothing Major, the one with Query, John Isner, Stevie Johnson, and Jack Sock, comes out typically on Thursday. I listen to Baseline Intelligence, and I listen to one that's in Spanish, Sala de Jugadores. There's basically like the Players Lounge is for easier translation, which is done in Argentina with Juan Monaco, Mariano Zavaleta, Javier Frana, Guido Pella. So again, I mean, it's almost my listening routine has gotten on a daily basis. I have something to listen to. So it could be in the car, it could be while I'm at the house. I have it in the background. But the content has always made me want to listen. And,
Could you give us the names of those players with the English pronunciation? No, I'm just kidding. I'd rather hear this. Say the names again, though.
So Juan Monaco.
Monaco.
You want me to say it like for an American, or you want me to say it as a Latin guy?
The Latin guy. Give us the Latin guy.
Then you got Mariano Zavaleta. I mean, these are guys that were all. I think Monaco was top 10 in the world. I think Zavaleta was top 15. Zavaleta was number 1 junior in the world. Then you have Guido Pella, who a few years ago got to the quarters of Wimbledon. And then you have Javier Frana, who is got to be in his mid-50s, I would say. And, he was really the first guy, whenever I used to go to South America in the summers, he was really the first guy that made me realize how terrible, for the most part, the commentary was in the U.S. compared to other countries. He used to do all the commentary for ESPN Tennis in one end for South America, and he was great. I mean, literally, I don't know how many years he must have done it for, but he was phenomenal. And even for a guy like myself that, I'm close to fluent. I don't know if I'm the natives wouldn't say I'm fluent, but for the most part, I understood. I was constantly entertained, and he was very educational. So when I actually, ironically enough, I went to Chile this last year. I went to Chile and Argentina for the pro events, and I met up with him in Santiago, and he was sitting at a table talking with Sebastian Baez, and it was basically like almost a little bit of a preview of what his podcast ended up becoming, because that's what they talk about. They basically say, like, anybody we bring in, it's like we're all sitting at the same table inside the players' lounge and just start a conversation. And I actually mentioned him. I go, you were really one of the first guys, that I ever listened to outside of the United States. And I think you're tremendous. He's a great guy. Very, very friendly.
With, no, that's to your advantage, being able to say like you with Ivan, being bilingual, speaking English and Russian, to be able to listen in a second language. I think podcasts were born from COVID. I remember Dave Fish saying it's like we're going back to talk radio. It's interesting because there's certainly a buildup right now, but will podcasts fade? Will it be a form of communication that doesn't remain as popular as it is right now? Coming back to this list I have, Craig Shapiro. He's been around the tour forever. He's a stringer. I mean, he knows the ins and outs of professional tennis. He has, I think, I like his format. I think it's very, very solid, but it's just tennis with Greg Shapiro. He actually has a second one. I think that's interesting too. Some people have. You could research that. They have more than they have a podcast with a different title. We can go back and talk about Andy Roddick's, but he was just like boom, right up to the top of the charts. And next thing you know, he's on Tennis Channel 2. I've always liked Roddick's sense of humor. I always think of NASCAR, Roddick. How can people, and I do think profanity helps. We don't do that because I think a lot of our tennis parents are riding around with kids in the car, but I don't get effing NASCAR, 4 hours of turning effing left. But
Andy's very funny.
One thing, great interview. Self-deprecating, but like for Andy, thing about I think most podcasts to me where they're disappointing is they're so connected just to pro tennis, talking to famous people or people who are servicing famous people. But I think Andy Roddick, for example, I mean, he obviously just pushed a few buttons on his phone, calls Roger Federer up and said, "Hey, I'd like to interview your mother and father." Now, to me, that would be a great interview. Because I think it should be more about this, that, and the other thing, not just pro tennis. But that's one thing thus far. And I know that there have been podcasts where they talk about sponsorship or, the money and different aspects of tennis. To hear Andy Roddick talk about the guaranteed money of the pros, it's pretty interesting. But no, that would be at his fingertips to go more to the backstory. I think many times the backstory is more interesting than the story itself. Like how did Roger Federer? That's a question that Craig Shapiro asks all his guests. How did you get to be so good? And then they just go right back and talk about the beginning. The tennis podcast with the Brits, that's a way to get a very good update. They're not knowledgeable with forehands and backhands, but they're knowledgeable. It's interesting. They know tennis. But in our world, we'd say they know tennis, but they really don't know tennis. Like they're not going to tell you the whys, why someone struggles a little bit on the backhand side. One thing I think we spent some time on, I think this is a up and comer. It might be the most. Climbing the charts to be number one is Nothing Major.
That's a great one.
Tell us the 4 players again.
You want me to say it in my Latin voice, or
yeah, give us the Latin voice. Unless you want,
Sam Querrey, Jan Isner, Stevie Johnson, and Jack Sock. As Latin as you get.
And it's interesting. They're obviously, I would say, much more professional than us because they have professionals helping them do it. But yeah, we'll come back to Nothing Major. But the title comes because none of them won major tournaments, and I think that's a shot at doubles because Jack Sock, to my knowledge, fact checker, Andreas Barbosa, fact checker, he won 3 doubles. So that's a slap in the face to doubles that they're calling their podcast Nothing Major. I mean,
it's totally a shot because they also go off and they talk about how, does it really, I think one of their last episodes was about, their experiences at the World Tour Finals, and they basically Jack made it twice in doubles, once in singles, and they kind of discount the one in doubles. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just seems like, again, that's part of it's tennis's fault, right? Like tennis is to blame for the lack of interest in doubles, because, when I see the amount of people that play pickleball and they play doubles, there's an interest. And I can pretty much assure you that a doubles tennis match, at least on TV, is way more entertaining to watch than a pickleball. Now, pickleball might be a lot more fun, especially if you don't really know how to play tennis. Easy to kind of get into, but, tennis is to blame, right? And you wouldn't have heard 20, 30 years ago that, the doubles is not entertaining. So I think tennis is to blame for that. But I actually want to just go back to one thing you were talking about. Will podcasts fade? And, it's like the reinvention of talk radio. Well, the talk radio angle is a good one. I never thought about that. But, talk radio, you would only listen to in your car. Where now with this, like, you can literally have it all day. You can go for a walk. You can listen to it. You're at your house. You can listen to it. So, it's there. So will it fade? I don't know. I mean, if it fades, it's going to be replaced by something better, right? Like, what's really dead, are TVs. Like, no one's, watching this stuff on TV. They're going to watch it on their phone or their tablet or what have you. But, if it does fade, it's going to be replaced by a different medium that might be, the newer technology of the day. But, it's a reinvention more than anything else.
No, that's an interesting point because of the car. Yeah, you listen in the car. For me, I much rather, read a book than go for a walk, but just for exercise. Yesterday, so many days, usually it's 1 and 1, but sometimes it's, 2 hours in a row. And number one is I return phone calls, but in between phone calls, and some people tell me they don't like to listen to podcasts 10 minutes at a time. They want to listen. They're going to listen to it. They want to listen to it from beginning to end. They don't want to have it be interrupted. For me, I have no problem, coming back and say, okay, I'll only listen to 10 minutes. I'll come back and pick up from there. We'll come back to nothing major. I have some notes on that. Here's some more on the list. Functional tennis. The Irishman, I should be able to tell you his name, but he's obviously very gifted when it comes down to building, what's it called, followers? So he has over 1 million followers. But again, he's primarily, 100%, I would say, he's talking to someone who's connected with, and fair enough, junior players as well, but connected with people that are around the competitive circle. Here's one, I think you've listened to this a couple time or two. Baseline Intelligence with Jonathan Stokey.
Yep, listen to that one. I mean, he does a very good job of getting a nice cross section of guests. But before I forget, maybe it'll spur your memory. For functional tennis, it was, I can't remember his last name, but it's Fabio.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't remember his last name now, but
no, Fabio is very upbeat. I'll use a stolen line that he kisses so much ass, human chocolate tastes like vanilla. He's just so positive, and I think that comes back to the commentators. It's like a love fest. I liked it better. Nice guy Arthur Ashe. They would just deadpan it. They still need to work on their backhand volley. And Gonzalez and Kramer, oh my word, they would just tell you like, they need to add this to the game. They're good, but so I miss that side of it. With Baseline Intelligence, I was recently interviewed by Jonathan, and I hit the editing floor because it was only like a 25-minute podcast, and I'm sure I talked to him close to 120 minutes. But I think, like a lot of people, the Tennis Channel, it's not the Tennis Channel, the Tennis Podcast, the from Britain.
Is that the one with like David Law?
Yeah, exactly.
Whitaker, Catherine Whitaker.
Yeah, David Law, Catherine. I mean, I should be able to rattle off their names as well, but no, they love the game, and they're there all the time. I mean, they're putting out something every day. But coming back to Baseline Intelligence, just like the tennis podcast, is they have a second podcast, like the Friends of the Tennis podcast. So you pay, and I think Stokey has that now for like $3 a month. I don't know if part of my interview is on the second podcast because I'm not part of the $3 a month. Yvonne, that's where we need to get into the business. And if our 10 listeners, if we could charge them $3 a month, we could get a pizza every month. I know you don't eat pizza, so it'd be really good for me. Cracked Rackets, if you want to follow college tennis. The gentleman leading that has done a great job promoting college tennis.
No, he's great on social media. I actually have not listened to that podcast, but I see a lot of the posts they make on Instagram. That's one I should probably listen to because I have a feeling that's one I would enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah, again, coming back to the extroversion, the humor. No, I think a lot of people are singing his praises, and I'm sure his coworkers as well for what they're doing for college tennis. Doubles Only, the young man who started Doubles Only, you could look that up. He's climbed the ladder where he's even been a consultant for the U.S. Davis Cup team. There's another one called Tennis Files. Like say Doubles Only, Tennis Files, ITA. There's some Intercollegiate Tennis Association. There's some of these like Baseline Intelligence where I know I've been interviewed by the host of those podcasts. Tennis Files have been around a long, long time. So the nice thing too is it's archived, is you can go back and there's Baskin Robbins. There's a lot of flavors in Baskin Robbins. You don't have to just go with chocolate, 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 vanilla, vanilla, vanilla. That you can go way back and because if you missed it, it's all right there to push a button and go back to a podcast from 5 years ago. Advantage Connors. I think one thing with Advantage Connors, a lot of these podcasts, and I'm such a rookie still, 200 plus episodes in. I remember asking Andy Fitzel when he went back to Germany with his wife, his German wife, said, well, what about the podcasts? How often do we have to do those? He said, once a week. And I said, okay. And we've been doing them once a week. But no, it's amazing how some of the podcasts, they're daily. They're daily.
Well, you know what? That's one thing I wanted to bring up is that you mentioned that is I actually wonder if that's one reason why I don't listen to those podcasts. Basically, I mean, I don't know how often Roddick comes out with something, but the other one that you were mentioning with the two Brits, I mean, they're not that interesting to be putting stuff out on a daily basis. So at least, and again, I'm assuming that everybody kind of has they don't want to have conflicting days, but I mean, it's ironic that, or interesting anyway, that one of the podcasts that I listen to, one comes out on Monday, one comes out on Tuesday, yours comes out Wednesday, another one comes out on Thursday. It seems like it's, like they strategically also might have picked their days for release to not conflict with others. But I mean, a daily one is basically like tuning into the tennis channel. I mean, and when it's some of them are the same faces that you see on, you bored me on one medium, you're probably not going to get a second chance to bore me on the second one.
Well, and I do think the daily podcast, it's like, well, I don't have to buy a newspaper, which is kind of nice if you really, want to find out, how the matches went. That's what's great about the trio from Britain is they're going to tell you match by match what happened. Say the next major is going to be Australia. Coming back to Baseline Intelligence, so I certainly did listen to the episode that I was on, and this senior moment, I was talking about Medvedev. It was a Rod Laver, and I don't think he necessarily picked this up from Rod Laver. Rod Laver is famous for saying, if I can't get one out of two serves in, I don't deserve to win the point. So instead of saying Medvedev, I said Ivanisevic. So I was wrong. It was really Medvedev one summer. I said Ivanisevic was getting hammered by Djokovic. It's like, oh gosh, senior moments. It says I need to have somebody correct me, go back and edit that. It was Medvedev. And I think from that time forth, he just started clocking his second serves. It's like, well, okay, you're going to just, make my second serve lunch. I'm going to just hit 2 first serves. But I do think that a lot of these outfits, though, have a team of editors. They're always thinking they're producers, and we don't want to tell anybody that our podcast is last minute, but we're doing 1,000,001 things, and we don't have a professional crew. Yvonne is the person who gets it done. Tell us about Sam Querrey. Let's go to Nothing Major. You're always singing his praises.
Well, you know what? The part that bothers me the most is that the previous era of media, call it like the Mary Carrillos or any of the other ones from that era, they just did a terrible job of promoting players, right? So basically, it was either Nadal or Federer. That's it. It almost seemed like they were reluctant even to include Djokovic in that until, he started winning a lot. But, how is it that, as Americans, we don't know that a guy like Sam Querrey is as funny as he is? I mean, I remember years ago when he posted something on Vine, with a horse head or something, but you never really knew, you never saw that side of him, right? So it's crazy to think that, there was a time frame where basically Tennis Channel, ESPN were only showing American matches. But there was never an interview. Like, why is it that we're seeing the personality of these players now at the end of their careers or after their careers and not during their career? I mean, it doesn't happen like that in other sports, right? In basketball or all these other sports, you kind of know something about a lot of players. You know their backstory, you know where they went to college, you know who they're dating, you know something about them. You may not hear them speak all the time because some of them maybe don't speak that great, but you know something about them. And again, I think it's just, guys like, all of them, maybe with the exception of Jack Sock. I mean, they're all pretty funny. They're all, they go off and they just bounce off one another, and it's very humorous. I mean, it's a shame that, I was actually at the U.S. Open watching Alcaraz play a first round match against Federico Coria, I believe, and they announced Sam Querrey's retirement, and he was sitting in a suite, and it was just like a wave. Like, that was like the extent of the goodbye, and I'm like, oh, that's possibly the saddest goodbye I've ever seen in pro sports.
I think there's chirping. I think the one thing about the 4 players, Sam Querrey, Jack Sock, Stevie Johnson, and John Isner. Let me say a couple of things about Sam Querrey. Is that I have so little to say, but I just think of the California kid, the free spirit, the rolling around in the VW bus. I remember hearing a story that I think he was a 16 Kalamazoo champion, and that's when his parents first heard about ITFs. They just, they weren't certainly climbing the fence. I believe his father was a baseball player. But, I don't know any more than Joe Public. But I do remember, and just listening, I know also, too, that he's very active on social media, which I'm not. I don't think you are either, right?
As far as posting, no. I mean, I tune in maybe once a day and see things, but I'm not. I'm not a content creator.
I would think that the people that are following Sam Querrey through social media would know that he has a sense of humor that now comes out with. And their podcast is relatively new. Maybe they've only had like 10, 12 episodes, but Indian Wells, that tournament, that facility is always improving. But it used to be the men's locker room. You'd go in and there was a lounge, then there was a locker room, and the lounge wasn't really that not the players' lounge where the restaurant is, but just a lounge, the front side of the locker room. So I'm just sitting in the lounge by myself, and Sam Querrey, who I don't know, they have these, I mean, I'm telling you, it was like these little plastic bottles. They couldn't have more than, like, I would guess 4 ounces, but he was saying 2 ounces. So he comes up to me and he's just so animated. He's holding this little water bottle. He goes, "Is this the dumbest effing thing you've ever seen?" And I go, "Yeah, that's not that practical." And then he goes on and on. And he goes, "Well, tell me what you really think." And I said, "Well, I think it's a waste of money." I said, "I think that there shouldn't be a 4-ounce water bottle." But then he goes to the locker room and he takes a survey. He's walking around, and anybody he sees, that he's on a mission. And this energy and just off the wall. That's one thing with Sam Querrey. I know Matt Clore actually traveled with him just like maybe for a week, helping him out. They used to help players out. And with, listening to the podcast, I think really for the most part, all tennis kids need a lesson on tennis relaxation. They need to be able to laugh a little bit. And he certainly had people in the locker room like Sam Querrey. That was the most important thing to him at that moment, was finding out what people thought about the 2-ounce water bottle. With
funny said about surveys, because he goes as of late. I mean, you're right. He's probably, I think they might be on maybe on 15, podcast number 15, but you've already had a few surveys, or lists as they're having. They talk about their favorite cities in the fall schedule for the favorite tournaments. They talk about, whether or not he was right for not venmoing money for him. I mean, they just, every week it's a new thing just to laugh about. And you're right. I mean, it's, kids do need that little bit of a relaxation, because you should always have somebody like in your life that kind of just makes you laugh, right? And when you see a lot of these kids at tournaments and they're just like looking up their ETR constantly, like 100 of the decimal points would make that much of a difference in their mood. And it's, he just seems like, again, it's interesting, like those guys kind of all gravitate to one another. You want guys like that around you. And it's interesting how, they had Diego Schwartzman on the episode recently, a guy from Argentina, that speaks English, but, not fluently, perfectly, you know what I mean? So it's just funny, or it's interesting how, like, those personalities, they congregate, they find one another. It's not, language barriers, what have you. I mean, you can just feel that a person has, as you said, relaxation skills, and you kind of gravitate towards those people.
I think it's great how they beat each other up. I mean, I know I've beat up Sam Querrey going, could you imagine if he could volley? And I said this on a previous episode. I was, Paul Rodert was in charge of the USTA player development at one point. And I just remember saying, the Sam Querreys of the future, can you imagine if that guy could follow up his serve with his volley? And all these years later, they're chirping each other on like who's got the worst backhand volley or who's got the worst backhand. This is a repeat, but I can remember Elliot Telscher, who, certainly spent so many years with Lansdorp, but Lansdorp inherited the junior program that Vic Braden built for 7 years at the Kramer Club. And then Ashley Weinhold, who started in gymnastics, was a really good athlete. She became number 1 in the U.S. Her parents spent 5 years at this program we had in Tyler, Texas, 2 as students, and then they ran a country club in Tyler, Texas. And so I remember it was at the Roosevelt makeshift conference room, indoor court, and it was Sam Querrey and Ashley Weinhold hitting volleys, and Elliot Telscher was feeding the balls. And I was sitting there with a late Tom Fye, and I go, Sam Querrey will finesse every backhand volley just based on his grip and his position, like say his elbow on his forehand volley. And, but certainly I think that's what's lacking in tennis straight across the board. These guys are all obviously fantastic tennis players, but for me, I can just listen to them and we can go through each one. And, they know, for example, I'll jump ahead with John Isner, for example. I was at Saddlebrook with Austin Krajicek, and they're doing a drill where if you win on the volley, you get 2 points. You're playing back and forth, but if you can close in and you win a volley, and the winner moves up, the loser moves down. It's just like a junior development program. And Isner at that time, I mean, for years and years at Saddlebrook, Sampras was the best player. But at that time, Isner was the highest ranked player at Saddlebrook. And Isner, extroverted with humor, he just yells out, "Hey, Krajicek, no way you should lose this drill." He's basically saying, Krajicek, we all know you have the best volley out here. But it's like, well, if you know you don't have a very good volley, why don't you do something about the volley? I think he's retired now, so I could say this. Tennis Sangren, I would never solicit, never hustle a player, but I never coached Tennis Sangren for 1 second. But I was traveling with him because I was with Krajicek, and Sangren was having hip operation, maybe both hips, at least one. And he left his car at my place in Florida. And I said, hey, tell you what, Sangren, when you're coming back, rehab, pro bono, I'll help you with your volleys. So turn the clock ahead, and then I'm at the US Open with Ram Ramanathan, and we're sharing a court. Andy Fissel's with me. We're sharing a court with Krajicek as Sangren or practicing. And Sangren had just played my son, and I said, hey, get over here. Because he had beat my son, and with a very convincing score. And get over here. What are you doing that to my son? So he's at the US Open. I mean, here's a guy who had like 7 match points against Federer. I mean, he's not a chicken liver. This guy's a really good tennis player. And he said, hey, coach, I should have taken you up. I should have learned how to volley. I mean, he's at the US Open. I'm just baffled by that. But let's move on to one of the other cast members, Jack Sock. What comes to your mind with Jack Sock? You said you don't think he's as funny?
I mean, might be the shyest one on the podcast. I mean, which is kind of ironic because when you kind of see him in person, he's a little bit more outgoing, but it just seems like he's the one that needs to be needled a little bit more to kind of get going. So, but what do I think about him? Basically from this podcast, since I'm an avid listener, the one thing that it just sticks out the most is if I were to put bullet points on each one, I know a lot about Jack Sock's wife having a peanut allergy. That's it hasn't been very much that we've learned of Jack Sock yet. Maybe that's going to be a future.
I'm glad you mentioned that, but because of that, if I think I've listened to every episode that they've had, and they're streamlined. They have a format like I mentioned with Craig Shapiro, and they're 1 hour. They're 1 hour almost to the minute, and
I'd say it's a little less actually.
A little less. So if you're one of those listeners that you could listen to 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and it's only, as you said, once a week, it's pretty easy to knock out that 60 minutes. I mean, if you get up and go, okay, and I'm telling juniors a lot of times, why don't you just daydream a little bit? You don't have to always be hooked up to something electronically, but you think about, okay, I'm doing the things that you do in the morning where you're putting a piece of bread in the toaster and taking the eggs and put it on the bread and is I do think it makes people a little bit antisocial. I think with young kids, I mean, if they got earplugs in and, they at least say good morning to the person in the room that they're with. But Jack Sock, certainly his name came up a time or two when he won those 3 doubles titles. They were all with Mike Bryan, right? Wimbledon, US Open twice.
Didn't he win it with Pospisil?
No, there you go. He won Wimbledon twice. He won it with Pospisil, and then he won it with Mike Bryan. But Raven Klaassen, I think he was 6'4" in the 5th, one of our students. So we're pulling for him, and he got a serve broken. But I remember Klaassen saying, "Yeah, you got to serve to his forehand, so then you can try to volley to his backhand." But it's interesting. His forehand more RPMs. I mean, just a volley off of that, of course. But then when you think about the math that players have trying to volley, where if they've got the racket face open 45 degrees. And he's clocking that forehand that looks like an egg as it comes to you. And then also, too, another thing that's not really brought up is how much time have they really spent being at the net? I couldn't believe this happened when Marty Fish, and maybe this is one reason that he's no longer the Davis Cup captain, but they didn't invite Rajiv Ram. I think he was one in the world. They didn't select him, but they had Taylor Fritz, Tommy Paul, and Tiafoe. So if they were thrown in doubles, those three are going to play one up, one back. So I'm thinking, well, maybe that made sense that they're just going to, if they're going to use one of those three guys to play with Sock. Sock certainly didn't play conventional doubles. It was such a huge serve. But what a competitor. I think for parents listening, one thing about Jack Sock is that he didn't play up. He just kept winning gold balls. I don't know how many he's won, but 80 in high school tennis. Connors' name was mentioned with Advantage Connors, his son Brett. Jimmy Connors' advice, always play your age group. What if you're dominating? Always play your age group. Serve and volley, mix it up, play different patterns, but always play where the pressure is. Because when, juniors are playing up, well, if they're 14 and they're playing 18s, I always think of people like Tracy Austin. I believe Kathy Rinaldi as well. They had the Whiteman Cup, Fed Cup, junior tournaments, junior Fed Cup. Actually, what was it called? There was a Sunshine Bowl for 18s, Sunshine Cup for 18s, and then it was the Continental Cup. And, some of these top kids, Tracy Austin was, I think, she definitely was top 10 in the world, and she's going backwards to qualify for a U.S. junior team event. That type of thing doesn't happen. But I think Sock deadpans it. I think he gets his laughs because he just, boom, he's just like he drops a bomb. Boom, this is what he thinks. And, but I think, Query and Isner, those guys were their laughter. Stevie Johnson, I think he's much more emotional. When he gets chirped, he takes it personally. What are your thoughts with Stevie Johnson on nothing major?
Yeah, it's funny you say that about Sock, though, because it's, he's almost, he needs a moment to kind of needle somebody. So I think it might have been the most recent one. They talked about cereals, and someone mentioned, might have been Isner that mentioned that he likes Wheaties. And I agree. When I heard someone say Wheaties, I was like, what? And then that just got Jack Sock going on just attacking him for like Wheaties. It was pretty funny. But Stevie Johnson's the same way. It's just basically, I actually think sometimes that the guys are needling him and, like purposely, like agreeing that Isner and Query are good practice partners or that the extra day is unnecessary. There's so many, I guess you have to like be an avid listener to it, but it's, it for kids, it's a great insight into the world of tennis. Like, so people might think that watching a tennis match might, a kid that's used to watching soccer, but they don't realize that a locker room is just probably funny no matter what sport you play, and it's just an easy listen. So about Stevie, I just, they had that recent topic where they were talking about what's more impressive, his undefeated streak in college or Nadal going 81-0 on clay. And, obviously what Nadal did is incredible. But I think I was glad to see that some people were not discounting what Stevie did in college because, they mentioned how, Nadal's a favorite everywhere he goes. And, that's not the case when you play college tennis. So what I didn't know is that if every match finished, I kind of asked that question. I was curious what percentage of Johnson's matches in college actually finished. Because once upon a time, you finished every match. And then at a certain point, like once the match was clinched, they stopped all matches. So I don't know what year that might have started, but that is a lingering doubt in my own head.
Now, for our listeners, DNF, college tennis matches did not finish. As a doting dad, I don't really consider myself to be a doting dad, but my son Connor, 2 years at Ohio State, 3 of the 4 years, the teams were in the Final Four. So they had the indoors and really outdoors. And I think he was 23-2. But yeah, I was always had that asterisk. I don't think that, you could say he's 23-2 without saying, well, you don't know about the DNFs. You know, I'll tell you, to digress this story, my son was playing a match with for Ohio State. And, you know, he'd won the first set, but he got down like 4-1 in the second set. And he was just, you know, intentionally double faulting and missing wide and just throwing away the second set. And Ty Tucker, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm not playing a 10-point tiebreaker, because if you started the third, they let you finish the third. You know, back to Stevie Johnson, I think there's certainly honesty with all four of these. That's you know, honesty is so important. I was with Austin Krajicek. We went up to Atlanta, and this is amazing. Stevie Johnson had not signed up. He was ranked high enough to be in the Australian Open, but he had forgot to sign up. So he's in this Australian wildcard tournament, and if you win it, there's 8 players, and if you win it, you're in the Australian Open. There's 8 women as well. So the coaches and whoever, most at that level, it wasn't like the players had an entourage. So basically, I would say each player had one person with them. So there's a meeting, and there's you know, I don't know, 20 people in the room. There's 16 players. Well, no, there's, you know, probably 30 plus in the room. And they have these huge chocolate chip cookies. And I don't know Stevie Johnson from the Man on the Moon. I've been around him a little bit. But so he comes in, the last guy into the meeting, but every person, coach, trainer, whoever, all the players, there's some nice ladies walking around these baskets of these big, thick, huge chocolate chip cookies. And every person said, no, no thanks. No thanks. I said, no thanks, because by the time they got to me, I didn't want to be the only person in the room who said, yeah, I'll take a chocolate chip cookie. So Stevie Johnson goes, yeah, thanks. He takes 2. And he ended up winning. I'm just thinking, honesty is the best policy. I said the other players, they should have, I'm sure closet eaters, they were probably having the chocolate chip cookies back where no one was watching. You know, certainly, you know, it comes up as backhand. With college tennis, Mr. College Tennis at USC, I mean, I was at 2 NCAAs to see him play. And, you know, just the confidence he had. You know, you didn't really know he had such a backhand problem. I mean, I saw him playing juniors as well, but you didn't know he had such a backhand problem until you got to the pros. I always remember a player who spent some time with us years and years ago, John Lafindiaga. And certainly I'm sure he heard it from somewhere else or someone else. On the pro tour, if you have a weakness, they will find it. And CB, Craig Boynton, was on there as a guest not too long ago. And as somebody else in my journey in tennis, I've met him, but I don't really know him that well or know him at all, but it's certainly been around him here or there. And I think it was Boynton who said, just hit slice. Kind of like a trick question. What's better, topspin or underspin? And the answer is which shot lands deeper. But, you know, definitely with a passing shot, you know, I made a tape for a young player from Hawaii yesterday, and he's passing with underspin. He's floating the ball up in the air like it's a kite. I go, what are you doing? I know I was on the Tennis Files. I was interviewed by the host of the Tennis Files, and it was right after I'd watched Stevie Johnson play doubles with Krajicek. And Krajicek's such a quiet, easygoing, polite guy. Is that Stevie was definitely the captain, and I'm just thinking, I'm shaking my head, is going, Austin, you should be in charge of what's going on out there. One thing when I think of Stevie Johnson is this was really an honor that I was at Indian Wells, and his dad, because we put out this free educational content, his dad, the late Steve Johnson, came up and asked if he could hang out with me for the day. But this is something for the listeners to write down. Steve Johnson Sr., tennis lets you know who you are. Tennis lets you know who you are. With coming back to the cereal, I'll do that at tennis camps and say, okay, just name cereals. And it's just amazing. Kids have so much fun with it. Rainy day. All right. And not name your favorite cereal, but just keep naming cereals. And it's like, I mean, it's pretty easy to say, we're going to get to 40. How about the big boy, the tall guy, John Isner? What comes to your mind with him on that Nothing Major?
What comes to mind? From his personality or just from the show, from the actual
Well,
podcast?
both. I mean, the personality of the four of them, that is the show.
It sounds like he's just so structured and methodical and just in his life that, he still goes out there every single day and does like his prehab before, just every day. And, you see all these other three that they're retired and they're basically, they want to distance themselves as far as possible from their daily routine as professionals. And he's, talks about how it's just for his way of life. Like he just feels like he's doing his prehab before every day. Just, maybe it's because you're 7 feet tall. Maybe that's the complexities of life. But I laugh about everything. They talk about their favorite Halloween candy and who can like which is the corn one. I forgot the
candy corn.
Candy corn.
Candy corn. There you go. It's just across the board, or when they talk about cities in Europe and he mentions, I forgot where he mentioned some city in Asia, and he basically like talks about because of the light shades or the hotel. So it's just, again, it's just a side of tennis that people don't see and a personality that you don't see. And, it can really spur the sport on. I mean, I really think that, I think I don't think he coined it. I think it was Opelka that coined it. But, towards the end of his career, he kind of embraced the idea of being a serve bot. And, that was a way of, I guess, getting engagement on social media. But, the guy really is a funny guy to listen to.
I'm sorry. Towards the end of his career, being what? Serve?
Riley Opelka used to call themselves a serve bot.
Okay.
Like where all they had was a serve. So,
Right.
And on a personal note, I know that Isner had a big hand in getting Juan Monaco into football. So we're all in a fantasy football league, and Isner really like passed on his love of the Carolina Panthers over to him. So it's just, again, it just shows like even tennis going like, it's a very international sport, and you get guys from completely different countries and customs, and he converted him into a fantasy football guy where the guy is on top of it. He knows everything. He knows more than I do.
With John Isner taking care of his body, obviously he's made millions and millions of dollars, but he'll earn that every day the rest of his life. All those athletes, they're gonna have problems with their hips or problems with their knees, all that pounding on hard courts. So I do think that's one thing about athletes. They do make a lot of money, but they pay for it their whole life. I think that's an important thought. But with, I know Stevie Johnson was on the Tennis Channel a time or two, but Isner, maybe he also has to stay in shape because he's been on TV. I think people are going to be on TV. That's the camera's supposed to make you look 10 pounds heavier, so they have to be camera ready. But to me, and again, I enjoy the podcast very much, but put Sam Querrey, give that guy a microphone. Tennis Channel needs to just let Sam be Sam. I mean, I think that would be great. I think tennis really needs that.
Well, I think the next evolution of these podcasts is going to be the current players that are doing it. So I know that Nick Kyrgios, while he was injured, had some sort of a podcast that was out. I forgot the name. And then you've got a guy like Caruso, who is went this year at the age of 30. He played at UCLA, and he basically chronicles his journey to coming into pro tennis at the age of 30. So I think it's probably going to be the next wave, is that you're going to get current players to go out there and give you that behind the scenes look into a life as a tennis player.
With Isner, I've worked with people who coached him in juniors, in college, and in pros. I remember Mike Sell coming up to me one time and, actually looking back at this, it's like, well, we probably shouldn't have done that. Probably I tell people, oh, that's a weak word. We shouldn't have done this but we put film up of Isner on the backhand volley and saying, well, he's such a great player. And also too, is that when we criticize pro players, it's not saying the pro needs to change their game. But I think upcoming junior players, less than 3% of junior players played college tennis. So if a junior player, they have a hole in their game, they need to take care of it. They should look for anything and everything, every advantage they can find to become a better player. But so Mike Sell, not sure what he's doing now, but he was the coach at LSU with his wife a few years back. But he was at Saddlebrook, the famous place in Tampa. I think that's where it was. Maybe he was at a college, maybe he was at the NCAAs. But he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I saw your video on John Isner." I just went, "Uh-oh." And he goes, "No, I agree with I agree with every comment, that comes in with that open racket face and angle the racket path down." But it's just amazing. You think of, Query and Isner. They played doubles. They talk about that. I think both Query and Isner have played some with Jack Sock. But, just think of Sam Query and John Isner with these huge serves. Jack Sock has a very good serve as well. But all four of these guys are serve and stay back doubles players. And, I do think that, like say if you think of Jack Sock, who's perhaps injured, out of shape, hadn't been playing, and he's on the Laver Cup team because of his ability in doubles. But I like the comment where, who are you going to bet on, the superior athlete with the inferior system, or the inferior athlete with the superior system? So Jack Sock from Nebraska, I think he's slowing down here for sure nowadays. He would say he's playing wiffle. He's not playing pickleball. Because I play wiffle. He's always just calls it wiffle. But I used to say that Jack Sock, when he was younger, I said that kid probably could have been a safety for Nebraska. So many things they could get into too, like Query and Stevie Johnson, I wouldn't know, but Jack Sock and John Isner, one thing that's had to help him become better players is having older brothers. So just like Andy Roddick, these guys, they could interview so many people that would be really interesting, like the role of the big brother. How about Andy Roddick? What do you have on Roddick? The podcast on podcasts.
I just remember Roddick, going back as a little kid. I remember seeing him at tournaments, running around with his brother. I think you mentioned once about how he used to come up to people and ask what the score was of the match that just finished. And I remember him out at the Daytona Beach Tennis Center, just playing on that little makeshift wall they used to have over there. And he used to always run over and ask questions. And then, fast forward, now, and it was always a great listen to. So, there was no doubt that he was going to be good in TV media in some capacity. I just, from a selfish perspective, I think it's better that he's a better listen to on podcast formats than on actual TV.
To backtrack my train of thought, senior moment again, is when I was on the podcast as a guest, the write-up for Baseline Intelligence, Jonathan Stokey, said that I taught tennis for 50 years. That's true. But obviously going back 50 years, I was a complete neophyte, total rookie in the beginning. But it said I had coached 12 NCAA champions. And that's not correct. So I made a list, but with 17 players, but only 10 of them in Division I were ranked one, but 17 players and I'm sure the list could be a little bit longer with some homework. Not like I'm looking for names, but truly did the video work and documented the development. But yeah, I want to just put that out there that I just don't like that part of it. Where when you see somebody, or they'll say, "Well, I've taught 105 kids that have won gold balls," or my players won 105 gold balls, or we've won. Our players have earned $35 million worth of college scholarships. This the promotion of tennis. But Roddick,
You should have put that at the beginning of the. You should have put that at the beginning of the podcast. You're going to test it. Who's going to listen in 90 minutes later?
Yeah, it gets buried. Yeah, I don't know how long the list is. I think we have 10 listeners, and 3 of them have listened to every podcast. But Ivan, how are we doing? We have a few listeners.
Yeah.
How many downloads have we had?
I got the number recently. I'd put it at overall on YouTube and all the listening outlets, like on apparently Google has a podcast listening station. I didn't know that, but let's say on Apple Podcasts, Spotify are the main 2, and then on YouTube combined overall, I believe the number was somewhere around 400,000 downloads total over all the podcasts lifetime.
With the Andy Roddick, though, with the podcast, yesterday we made a film of a young girl from Scotland, and I believe the dad is. I know he's a professor. He's not a tennis teacher, but a young 9-year-old girl, and she's hitting the ball really well, and that's what the GreatBase is all about. That a family can help a family. I mean, the father can help a daughter, and on and on. Siblings get out and practice together because tennis has become so expensive. I asked Ivan, and I get a lot more positive feedback than Ivan because he doesn't find out what's going on. It says that email TNT, but it's the president of the Federation for Trinidad and Tobago Tennis. Wants to log on the GreatBase website, or to be up here in our mountain retreat, and we're making a tape for a player of the NCAA. So. But yeah, our podcast today is on podcasts. Let's talk a little bit more about Roddick. I put some notes down here. I could have a podcast on just Roddick. What comes to your mind?
Yeah, you can pair that up. You can pair that one up with the one that you said you could have a podcast on Connors.
Jimmy Connors. With here's a crazy comment that. In one realm, it's like, yeah, I know more about Jimmy Connors' his tennis than Jimmy Connors. The players, they don't say what they do or do what they say. Malcolm Gladwell, the author of many books, Outliers, probably the most popular, they took it down, but there's a clip on YouTube, and Malcolm Gladwell did some work with Vic Braden, and he said pros have absolutely no idea how they hit a forehand, a basic forehand ground stroke. And it's true. They just hit it. I don't think there's going to be any tournaments anytime soon for, who can take 28-year-olds and teach them at the same time and say, okay, let's see if we can get these kids to serve, get these kids to have some solid fundamentals. But Roddick, I'll just throw this out to get started. Go ahead.
So you said what comes to mind with the Roddick podcast. So basically, when it started, A, I loved unfiltered Roddick. And then B, I actually liked that the guy that he did, for the most part, sat down with, I guess he goes by producer Mike, he knew very little about tennis. He would ask a lot of questions, but the humor was always there, right? Like it was, they talk about going to the U.S. Open and how guy watched his first match and he's basically front row, and so that part of it was very funny, and it was always refreshing. It was always new, and I just kind of lost a little bit of interest once, it became more like the Tennis Channel, right? Like once you brought in Wertheim now in my mind, it kind of like lost that uniqueness that that you had before. So, and again, I maybe me, I like listening to for my podcast usually for humor. So Roddick has that in spades. As you have Shane Furry has that. When I listen to the one in Spanish, I mean, Mariano Zavaleta has got humor, stories for days. I mean, so it's great. It's just a different avenue, a different method to kind of like spark interest. So yeah, I think that's what you're going to see in all these future ones, or the evolvement of this, is that it's not hard to keep someone reeled in. So, but this is going to be the new form. I'm probably backtracking here, but when you say like the worry of them dying off, like, I see like for the election, I followed the results of the election through podcasts. I put it on YouTube TV. I'm sorry, I have like YouTube Premium. I just put it on my TV and I watch. That's how I was watching the election. So, the days of like CNN or ESPN, I mean, sadly, or even Tennis Channel, I think sadly those days are slowly going away. Obviously if you're big enough, like in ESPN, you're going to be doing things through the app, but it's going to be the new way of media.
No, it's interesting you mentioned politics. We stay away from profanity. We stay away from politics. I always think of Michael Jordan's mother saying, Michael, you're not supporting the Republicans, are you? And I think that's pretty much how it went. He goes, Mom, Republicans wear sneakers too. Yeah. So
I didn't know. I never knew that story came from his mom.
Yeah. You could, that's how I heard it, as the story goes, with someone like Michael Jordan be way off. But what about John Wertheim? I know, like you mentioned, Courier. You really like Courier. I've grown to really, like John Wertheim. But I remember when he started out, I think he was pretty much a newcomer, but he's been part of tennis for a long time. So I think his commentary has gotten better and better. But isn't he in a little bit of hot water?
Yeah, I don't know the state of that, but I mean, I got to follow John Wertheim on, I guess, when he worked for Sports Illustrated. If we want to talk about dying media brands, there's a dead one. So I think that became CNN, Sports Illustrated, or I forgot what exactly became, but he used to have a daily mailbag. I'm sorry, a weekly mailbag where people would send in questions. And he was very good at that. Like he would address questions. He obviously was a tennis insider. He was around, so he would talk about it. And every week he had a good 10 to 15 questions that he would address, and that was a staple. So when he went on to TV, I don't know. I mean, maybe it was just me being critical, but it wasn't as interesting as he was on that tennis mailbag, for my personal taste. And then, yeah, I don't know exactly the details of it, but I know he basically got called out by like Barbara Krejcikova about making some comment about her appearance. I think he's on a suspension actually from Tennis Channel. So I don't know what the state of his being there. I mean, he's put up some apologies on the Roddick podcast, but I think it's just it'll be interesting to see what happens
with Sports Illustrated. I used to tell people, you say, what's your goal? What do you want to do? They used to always say, I want to play for the Montreal Canadiens. But the other answer, I said, I want to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It was huge, Sports Illustrated. I can remember my parents, I would get 3 magazines per week: Newsweek, Time, and Sports Illustrated. And I remember my brothers would just call me the slowest reader in the world, because I would get Sports Illustrated and I would read it cover to cover. Even the sports, okay, I'm reading about swimming, I'm reading about whatever sport. But now that comes back to the telephone, where now kids can, they're watching cats on a toilet. I mean, they're just watching just crazy stuff. Certainly, okay, that makes you laugh, but Yeah, Sports Illustrated used to be big. Like, who's on the cover of Sports Illustrated? How many times have you been on the cover of Sports Illustrated? One of my uncles saved every issue. He had an extra room, and it was just filled with Sports Illustrated magazines. Go to his house, it was just, it was a collector's item. But it's like, okay, I could just get lost in that room and go back to all the old articles. But yeah, I hadn't heard that, but that's so true. Sports Illustrated was huge in America at one point.
Whoever this person is that was collecting Sports Illustrated, I'm guilty of such. I think my parents' house was a huge container, or multiple containers potentially, that have all my old tennis magazines that World Tennis and Tennis Magazine that used to come out. And I mean, there must be. I probably became a USTA member in about '87. So fast forward all the years that I collected those magazines. Yeah, I mean, it was just a thing to do, right? Like, I remember going to lunch in high school, and a local place here, a sub shop, used to always have Sports Illustrated there. So I'd basically get there and grab a sports and start reading it. So crazy how much things have changed. But when whoever made that analysis in talk radio, he's not wrong. So it's basically, the more things change, the more things stay the same.
Money, the root of all evil. When Sports Illustrated came out with a swimsuit, it's biological to look at beautiful girls. So Melanie Trump, our former first lady, our first lady to be, she had a great answer when she was asked about her modeling career and perhaps some risque photos, and she said, "No, it was nothing worse than Sports Illustrated." That was a great answer. How about Ivan, baby? What do? You listen to tennis podcasts? You have to listen to this one more than once. You have to edit it.
Yeah, I listen to this one more than once. That's for sure. I get my daily dose, or I should say weekly dose. I edit it weekly. I don't particularly engage in tennis podcasts. If I were to catch a few podcasts here and there on a long drive, or whenever plane rides, I'd say I'd turn on something that's interesting to me. I always try and visit the big ones, like, okay, who has Joe Rogan had on recently? And then I just scroll down the last, however long I haven't watched or listened. And if I recognize a name, okay, I'll listen to this. And some other podcasts like Andrew Huberman, with his podcast, that Andrew Huberman Lab, I believe it's called. Just very intellectual things that make you think. I also enjoy some, comedians have their own podcasts. We have Alex, or the guy that works the front desk here, he's a great guy, and he, on his drive over, he listens to comedians and podcasts. Comedians like Theo Vaughn, for example, he has his own podcast. So it's actually very nice to be able to consume some content from people that normally you'd have to go to a venue and buy a ticket to listen to. So I'd say I'd say I'm not tennis podcast type of consumer. I'd do more things that aren't tennis related if I do go the podcast route. But I would say that's because mainly I have to edit this one. I have to listen to this podcast once, twice, and then maybe even a third time.
Poor guy.
Yeah. Poor guy's finished out by the time he's last thing he wants to see is anything tennis related.
I have to use a Vic Braden line. Vic Braden was, in public, Vic Braden, no dark humor at all. But if you knew Vic well, he talking about TV commentators. I remember him telling me about TV commentator. I think he's lucky to find the bathroom, because Vic used to try to educate the TV commentators he would work with. But no podcast will, I think, forever change the political elections. So Theo Vaughn, I had never heard of Theo Vaughn, except for our coworker who Yvonne just mentioned, Alex. And then I used to ask him, who'd you listen to today? Because he drives 40 minutes to work, to and from, up here in the mountains. So he lived at the bottom of the mountain. But one of my sons had sent me a podcast. Wayne Gretzky was interviewed by Theo Vaughn. So then Theo Vaughn was at the University of Virginia, and we had a tennis player here who was just so tight. And he was of age, he's maybe not quite 18, but it's okay. I said, I'm taking everybody. We're going to listen to Theo Vaughn. So we go to the University of Virginia, and then there's 10,000 people. This guy's huge. I mean, I'd never heard of him, 10,000 people. But I know he was big enough to be interviewed by Joe Rogan. Coming back to Mike Costa was interviewed by Joe Rogan, and I'm just going, oh my God, OMG, like Costa's big time now with, but certainly I do find time to listen to hockey heroes. I mean, you can go back and listen to people like Don Cherry. The other day I was listening to Walter Gretzky, Wayne Gretzky's late father. As a famous line, Wayne Gretzky became a really good hockey player, obviously. So everybody said, well, you have God-given talent. And his comment was, no, not being sacrilegious. He goes, no, I have Wally-given talent. Because of how he's brought up. He's skating 3 times a day. And Dad was an easygoing guy, but Wayne would get in the car. And if it was a 2-hour ride, 3-hour ride, is that his dad would be telling him what he could have done better for 3 hours. But obviously Wayne Gretzky, one of the ingredients for being a genius is being coachable. You imagine someone telling you for a long car ride, most kids just sound that out. They get to the point where they're not listening to the parents' criticism. And that's a sad thing. Back to Roddick. I know Roddick gets tired of Serena going, yeah, when we were 10, we played each other and I won. She just brings that up like every time. Where I know he has expressed, he goes, oh boy, I got to hear that again. But, no, for Roddick, I was listening. I know it was right away, it was put on the tennis channel, but, he doesn't, to me, let me ask you, Andre, you know better, I think. He doesn't have that many guests, right?
Roddick?
Yeah. I think it's
the other ones that I mean, Kim Clijsters has been a recurring guest. I guess he had Bouchard on. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have that many guests that comes to mind. So I think one thing we definitely should do before the podcast is over is, in nothing major fashion, we should go out and rank our. Apparently, Ivan is not going to be much of a contributor for this. He's going to have GreatBase as number 1, and that's it. But I think it would be a good thing to kind of rank our favorites.
Well, I know there's polls. I mean, I know there's polls that we're not on. I mentioned Control the Controllables. They've been number 1 on for 3 years in a row, whatever poll they have for tennis podcasts. But we can do that. Let me. This is a good time to end with Roddick. First time I heard of Andy Roddick, I had already heard of John because John, we had a really good 12-year-old and John beat him when he was 11. And like, who is this John Roddick? Because they're from Nebraska, but they were living in Austin, Texas when I was in Tyler, Texas. And then they moved to basically Delray Beach when I was in Boca Raton. So it was around, their junior tennis at that time. So age 7, Wichita Falls, just put a visual on this. I know it was Craig Tiley took a group of our players to sectionals, Texas sectionals, and the temperatures was always so hot. I guess it would be middle to late June in Wichita Falls. And Andy Roddick was on the backboard, never stopped hitting. Because I remember asking Tiley, tell me about this kid, John Roddick. And he goes, well, he's good, but his brother is definitely going to be really good. I go, what do you mean? He goes, he's 7 years old. He never stopped hitting the backboard, except for the backboard is right by the tournament desk. And every time, and he's had the juice at age 7, every time the players would come in to report the score, he would just stop, the 7-year-old asking these older kids all the way up to age 18, who won? What was the score? And then he'd find out who won, what the score was, and he would just turn around and hit the backboard. We coached a kid. I say we, Dave Anderson, I did, Jason Hazley. He was good enough to play at LSU. I can remember him playing age 11 because we were in Boca at Seguso Bassett. I can remember Andy Roddick. This is back when he was short term. He was at Macy's, and Macy's said, this guy's going to be great. They're playing touch football, and there's the kickoff, and Andy goes down, and he's playing with all these older kids, and he tackles. He's not playing touch football. He just tackles the guy. Macy always says he knew then that he was going to be great. But I can remember Andy, we weren't coaching him. I remember, I think one of the kids' name was Brooks, but they came by Seguso Bassett and just watched him play. And he was just one of those gnarly competitors. But when he was 16 or 17, Jeremy Wurzman beat him at Kalamazoo. PJ Domdo, somebody we worked with short term. But, Jeremy, we knew when he was going back in the, 10, 11 years old. But I remember, I think one was maybe the Coffee Bowl. But the other one was Kalamazoo, Wurzman American, and because Domdo is South African. And Andy was so upset that his mother said he never looked at the photos from Kalamazoo. But this is an amazing story. I'm sure it's been on the podcast before, but Andy's Marty Fish, they're in Boca. He's playing basketball for fitness. And but he's obviously training every day to be a great tennis player. And I believe it was Eddie Hearn Orange Bowl. He wins both. So he really jumped up from his losses over Domdo and Wurzman. But Andy Roddick moves to Boca because Steffi Graf. It was amazing to be in Boca and watch her practice. So what amazing footwork. I watched this tape of Steffi Graf just the other day because tomorrow we're interviewing a former coach from the University of Texas, Jeff Moore. And Beverly Bowes was playing, one of his top players there's looked at this short film of her playing Steffi Graf. Like, wow. What, Swiatek moves that way. But Graf was one to go forward much more than Swiatek. So Andy Roddick's courting Steffi Graf, as he would say.
Andre Agassi is courting.
Andre Agassi, yeah, thanks. That's why I need you guys. Andre Agassi, thank you. Andre Agassi he says stalking. So then Agassi gets to practice. He's the best junior in Boca. He gets to practice.
You got it backwards. Roddick is the best junior.
Yeah, keep helping me out. Senior moment. Roddick's practicing, and he starts to take sets from Agassi, and that's where all of a sudden, boom, he jumps up way in the juniors. And then shortly after, so now he's 19 and he's playing in Miami, and he beats Sampras. I really believe that stories like that, the backstories, like, wow, just wonder if he didn't get a chance to practice with Agassi at such a young age, how much did that type of thing impact his career? When he did beat Sampras at Miami, Sampras said, "I'll beat you when it counts." And not too long after that, they played at the US Open, and Pete. But at that time, it's very interesting. Top players like Pete Sampras over the years, like a Borg, they've lose to someone the first time they played them, but they didn't have a book on the player. So once a top player plays someone over and over again, they're the top player, and they're going to have a tendency to come out on top. But guys, thanks for helping me on the Agassi Roddick.
It's funny, actually. The first time I had really seen Andy at that stage when he was taking off, it was in New Orleans. They used to have an ITF event there, the Sugar Bowl. I think it was played like in...
Yeah, I think that's where Domdo beat him, the Sugar Bowl. It wasn't the Coffee Bowl. It wasn't the Toilet Bowl. I know that.
But basically, Grand Little was like on the 5th floor from a hotel. And I'll never forget, it was, I'd love to see the draw from that. I think it was like a stacked draw when I think back, but I will never forget listening to Joachim Johansson. And I think he was training with his father on an end court. And just the sound that was coming from from his racket when he was hitting a ball, and then a few years later he was top 10 in the world. Sadly, his career cut short by injury, but I never forget that the sound that I was hearing from that tournament.
Going back to Roddick's age, we have this on film, and his mother, late, I think Blanche, both Jerry Blanche passed away pretty close together. So he's 13 years old, and the word she uses is pitiful. His serve was pitiful. He had to regress palm up. And Stanford Boston, who I've met, he's actually, my son was working with the USTA and was on the pro tour. And so Stanford was a coach, and then Andy, just through frustration, put the racket in the salute position, and then it became famous, the abbreviated service motion. It was really through self-discovery that he learned to serve. With Andy Roddick, I've heard him yell many times, "My volley sucks." With Patrick McEnroe, this was picked up on a live mic, Davis Cup, national TV. Here's a guy who is arguably the best server in the world at the time. And Patrick, you can talk obviously from the sidelines. Now you can coach, I guess, period, but it used to be just for team events. So Roddick serving, and Patrick says, "Why don't you serve and volley?" He serves and volleys. He goes in, he flubs the volley, and then sarcastically turns to Patrick and goes, "That was a great idea." And I do think that's where I know Braden would, at times you get the pros mad at him, like he said about Jimmy Connors. I know now the files are being sent to the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Is that there's a thank you letter from Gloria Connors to Vic Braden and Gideon Ariel, where Jimmy served. Basically, he went from 74 to 104. But Vic had that line that Jimmy, his serve goes 72 miles an hour, but his grunt goes 104. And Gideon Ariel told him, I said, "Well, it's spastic, and that's a word that's used in American slang, because Connors used to get the blisters on the top of his feet." Or like McEnroe got mad at Connors. He got mad at Connors many times, but he got mad at Braden because Braden said, "You still lift on underspin," because the pros will say they stay down, and but that's where when Andy, I think so much of his podcast is talking about matches. I think that's one thing that's missing is that, and I've heard him defend himself on that backhand volley he missed. I think he would have gone up 2-sets to love against Roger in the Wimbledon final. I would say this. I heard this from Troy Aikman. Jim Kelly, who lost 4 Super Bowls, and Troy Aikman won 2. And Troy Aikman said, arguably, getting to the Super Bowl 4 times is better than winning twice. But Andy Roddick, who's in the Hall of Fame, I think 3 Wimbledon finals. Let me ask you guys, 3 Wimbledon finals is better than be the runner-up 3 times at Wimbledon versus winning the U.S. Open once. What do you think is better, Andres?
Then getting to the final 3 times.
You're in the Wimbledon final 3 times, or you have a choice. Your career, would you pick getting the Wimbledon final 3 times or win the U.S. Open once?
I'm not going to speak from my perspective, but I mean, I think any player, they'll take the win. I'm assuming most of these guys live the most of their careers regretting the things that they didn't do versus rejoicing in them. So I'm going to say win, obviously, but it's got to be the most painful thing. I mean, it's like asking Dan Marino, like, would you, he lost his 1 Super Bowl that he got into, and he's widely considered like the best quarterback by a lot of quarterbacks, but people kind of disregard that because he never won. So if you were to ask me when, that one's not. I don't know if I agree. That's a saying that you won the U.S. Open. Now, if you were to tell me what's better, doing let's say winning the year-end championship or finals of 3 Wimbledons. Yeah, give me 3 Wimbledons. But I mean, I think when you gave me the option of winning a U.S. Open, I'm going winning the U.S. Open.
No, I think it's a good answer. That's where the winners are the winners. Lendl, who got the U.S. Open 8 times, but I think he only won 3. You'd have to fact check that. How many U.S. Opens did Lendl win? But anyway, he
85, 86, 87, right?
So if he won 3 out of the 8, I just think 8 finals. Like, wow. What do you think, Yvonne? 3 Wimbledons or 3 finals or 1 title?
Yeah, you got to go with the win. Nobody remembers second place, unfortunately. But if you're thinking more personal achievement, I'd still go with the win because you came out on top. Wimbledon. You win Wimbledon, you get your name etched in the wall. So second place doesn't get that.
Yeah. One thing with Roddick, he's such a great player. I don't like the term one slam wonder. He's just a one slam wonder. It's like hit that person over the head for saying that. I mean, it's like Kornikova was a great player. I mean, you just think of her bio. People would die to have that type of playing background. Here's something else. I think that Andy, he certainly can beat up his game just like the guys on Nothing Major. He's being inducted to the Hall of Fame. Jim Courier's sitting behind him, and Andy says, I'm okay with getting inducted to the Hall of Fame because Jim Courier sit behind me and he had a crappy backhand too. Another time Roddick was on a stage with all these great players and he got the mic and he goes, I'm happy to be the worst player up here. I think honesty has a lot to do with humor. With our boy Thomas Jefferson from this part of the woods, number 1 and number 2, we mention it often, is integrity and humor. Got to be able to laugh a little bit. But no, definitely he's outspoken, he's opinionated, and he's funny. I'd like to see him have more guests though, and I think he, knowing the people he knows, he certainly could have, like I mentioned, let's talk to Lynette Federer. It was like, what was a 9-year-old Roger like? Because I think really educating tennis parents and again, we mentioned many times already the backstory. Okay, let's go with ranking podcast.
Who's going first?
You're going first.
All right, so I will. I'm going to just state for the record, I'm obviously biased. So I'm not going to list the GreatBase because I do listen to this every Wednesday. But I'll do it Family Feud style. I will start talk about a dying media brand. It was half the kids people here won't even know what Family Feud is, but I will go with number 3 as Baseline Intelligence. I do like listening to him. I like how he follows up his podcast with they post on Instagram, like that, kind of like stress the points that he talked about. And I mean, can I cheat here? I'm going to go with a number 1 because I love listening to Nothing Major. But because I do speak Spanish, unlike you, Steve, Sala de Jugadores is my number 1. I mean, it's got the combination of humor with, you get like Zabaleta and Pella that are just hilarious. You've got Prana, who's there as like the elder statesman that goes out there and mediates a little bit, gives a different perspective from his era. And then as he got older, as a coach, as a commentator, he gives a perspective. And, Juan Monaco goes out there and he really brings in a lot of different guests. I had a great guest recently, sports psychologist, who I apologize, I cannot get the guy's name. Stanislaw something. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a great podcast in the sense of dealing with sports psychology. So, I know that you have brought in Jim Lair. You got some interesting discussions. They also went to some into some depth. And that, for instance, is the topic that I've rarely ever, outside of YouTube, seen anybody really discuss in detail. Maybe years ago, I remember a Tennis Magazine article where they detailed the 16-second cure, and I think it's been morphed into 25-second cure. But that is my list. I have no ranking for GreatBase because I will be objective. Number 3 for baseline intelligence, and a co-number 1. If you speak English only, go with Nothing Major, and if you're bilingual, go with Sala de Jugadores.
All right. With how many? Again, there's how many speakers do they have? Yes, I mean, how many hosts? I should say.
Basically, if it's a full house, they've got 4 people. They've got they'll do the split screen. I mean, when you go to South America, so they're on YouTube, but in South America, apparently it's on DirecTV. So throughout South America, it's going to be viewed. And yeah, those 4. Some weeks people are traveling, so they just zoom in. But for the most part, it's generally a set of 4.
Well, first of all, I speak Spanish. Trabajo. That's a very important word. Very important word.
I'm going to assume you said work.
This one, can I roll my R's? Rapido. That's another one you got to have if you're going to coach.
Yeah.
Like in German, schnell, schnell. Arroz con pollo. Hola, ¿qué tal? I can speak Spanish. One time, it was a lot of VIP time, very important person, Chevy Chase, comedian for the young people listening, a writer. Such a funny guy. He used to be a permanent fixture at the Vic Braden Tennis College. A verbal heavyweight. I remember trying to give him a little bit of grief. That was a mistake. So he came in and said, like, V Gates. And I said, Chev, you speak German? He goes, I just did. So I can speak Spanish. For me, I think the rating is great, but I would say that I listen to podcasts out of duty. How's it go? It starts as a passion, and then it becomes a commitment, and then it's a duty. I mean, you got to be informed. And but I do think that Jonathan Stokey with Baseline Intelligence does an excellent job. I think that's one definitely to tune into. I think with my list, there's so many that I don't spend enough time with college tennis, cracked rackets. So I wouldn't really be one to make a list, but it's relatively new, but I really like Nothing Major. I did, like you, I kind of faded on Roddick because it certainly became too much like the Tennis Channel, where it's too much is about the matches. I'm more interested in the character of players, the history of players. But I would say my top 3, just to let you know that I'm an intellectual, is they're all hockey podcasts. Number 3 would be Don Cherry. Number 2 would be Spitting Chicklets. And number 3 would be out of St. Louis, Cam and Strict. But what they do, and what you can do with these podcasts, for listeners, you obviously know this, is that if you're just getting into podcasts, you can just listen to the interview. So a lot of the podcasts, like say Cam and Strict or Spitting Chicklets, it could be a 3-hour podcast, but they may only have a 1-hour interview. So a lot of times I just go straight to the interview, so I don't listen to the whole thing. But a podcast on tennis podcasts.
I actually have a question for Ivan, for the linguistically challenged, like Steve. With AI, is there a method that they'll be able to translate these podcasts to make it viewer friendly for Steve, or no?
Oh yeah, for sure. And as the years go on, it's going to be easier and easier. I'm using currently this one AI tool that helps level sound out. So, for example, if one person is speaking a little softer, instead of me going through and doing another run through, and picking out every time, sometimes someone said something softly, this AI tool will do it for me, and it does a pretty good job. And I guarantee you, there's an AI tool out there that already translates podcasts into, I wouldn't, maybe even into an English voice. Let's say your Spanish podcast into an English voice. However, I don't know about that one, but I know for sure there are tools out there that can translate it and then into English, like text, and then you can read it. I know that's out there for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised that anything and everything could be done soon with AI. Yeah.
A closing comment I would have, excuse me, Gesundheit. I told you I could speak German. People heard that story. I was riding a train. Guy sneezes, just two of us in this compartment. Guy sneezes. I say Gesundheit. He looks at me and goes, "Where are you from in America?" With closing comment I would have is the young junior players coming up, they got to do their schoolwork first. They're student athletes, but they don't listen to content. I'm asking kids all the time, what do you listen to? Yeah, it's great. It's like they're listening to music, live and let live. But with one time, and I'm not one to comment off comments, although I did read the other day that the way we teach tennis is 1955. I felt it was really good. It wasn't 1954. That's the year I was born, so I'm more advanced than people think. But
the real question is the person who criticized you, were they around in 1955 to know to make an accurate analysis? Because that's basically, you should get that perspective to have somebody from before and now. That's why I always used to love going out there and talking with some of these older coaches that since passed away, but let's say like Patricio Pay, Pato Rodriguez, and you had even Francisco Montana we mentioned earlier. Those guys were all around in all the different eras. So those are the types of people you should be asking, not 20-year-old kids.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. 1955, mentioned Tony Trabert. That's the year he won the French. Yeah, respect for the past. I've always said that in the sport I grew up in, ice hockey, no one's going to say Bobby Orr couldn't play in today's game. I think that was great with Federer wanting to honor Laver and, players from the past. But that's a great comment. I think also too, not only was tennis taught or how was tennis played in 1955, but the people that are criticizing, I'd like to watch your students play. How do your students hit the ball? I mean, Vic Braden, have they won the Pismo Beach close? You're from Southern Cal. Is there a town called Pismo Beach?
It doesn't ring a bell. Oh, actually, maybe up the street, meaning like 3 hours north. I think there is actually
Pismo Beach.
In Santa Barbara.
Bill Walsh is a famous football coach with Stanford and the 49ers. He was the one who said, I actually said this one time, someone criticized us for making, some comments, based on the play at the US Open stats or whatever. Could have been any tournament, pro tournament. So the gentleman said, well, who are you guys to criticize world-class players? Like the old thing, go sit in section F and buy some popcorn. But it's, you never know where a good idea comes from. So Bill Walsh would drive to work and back, and he'd listen to talk radio. And that was his comment. You never know where you're going to get a good idea. But I think with juniors listening, the whole thing is to be a student of the game. With, Joey Johnson, who's been a guest on the podcast, he's sent me so many students over the years, and he's got a book, Worthy to Win. And first thing I ask when he sends students, I go, have you read Joey's book? And I know I'm up to 3. And I've known the guy a long time, so let's really pick a big number. So say he sent me 100 players. Close to way up there. And, it's like, gee, you're taking lessons from this guy. I think also, too, junior players should have a library card, and they should read autobiographies. I've just, coming back to so many things, if you went back and just listened to all the podcasts I rattled off, is Craig Shapiro. He's interviewing current players, but players from decades ago. and say, how did you become so good? And I think that's always intriguing. All right, something to write on the bathroom wall, and we'll have to move on down the road. Another podcast in the books. Have we given value, guys? Have we given any value, any insights, any golden nuggets in this podcast? Ivan, you got a few to rattle off?
Yeah, I got a few here.
Here we go.
Anybody's a free agent in college tennis now. I don't get NASCAR, 4 hours of turning left. If I can't get one of 2 first serves in, I don't deserve to win the point anyway. Honesty is the best policy. What shot is better, topspin or underspin? Trick question, whichever lands deeper. Tennis lets you know who you are. Look for any advantage you can find. You need to be coachable. Integrity and humor. You never know where you're going to get a good idea.
Ivan, thank you very much. For our listeners,
to know that I offered 0 to Ivan on this podcast, because none of them were my points.
Not one?
Well, I write down like one-liners.
Not one.
You have longer points. I don't summarize them. Whenever I hear a good line, I write that down. But I can think of one that you said. If you would like to.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not hurt. It's okay.
Okay.
With our listeners should know that Andres, besides being a contributor to the GreatBase Tennis podcast and the fact checker of the GreatBase Tennis podcast, he's also been an editor for any written work. So that comes back to my command of the English language. You had to get all A's in English, I bet, huh?
That's a funny story. That's for a future podcast. We'll leave this one with the socks. I want to leave this
socks
with my. But no, I mean it was actually a learned trait. Actually, as the years went on with English, I've got a particular teacher in mind that helped me a lot. I would have done a lot better academically in English in high school if I had her in my early years versus at the end.
Well, when you clean the locker room, you have to say, okay, pick up the jocks and pick up the socks. What a great name, Jack Sock. You think that would be a name that they came up with somebody writing a novel on tennis? He socked him, Jack Sock. Anything else, guys?
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's good talking to you all.
No, thank you. A new way for us to end these podcasts is I just have Ivan, if you could just say, Smith, shut up.
Smith, shut up.
There you go. Those are great words. Hopefully we offered something. I know you offered your time. So thank you, Andres. And we look forward to seeing you in Miami.
Thank you, Andres.
All right, guys.
All right.
Talk
Adios.
soon.
Another podcast in the books, 224. My Spanish. Adios, amigos. Gracias. What do you mean I can't speak Spanish? Wave goodbye to the camera, Ivan. Thank you for putting these together.
Thank you, guys.